In this section, we're going to focus on the characteristics of rigor. In the previous section, we were learning about what is rigor and why do we need to build it into the lessons. And in this section, we're really going to take a closer look at those different characteristics of rigor. So when you think about the characteristics of rigor in the classroom, one of the things that we need to take a look at is thinking about those higher level questions. Are we asking those open-ended questions, probing questions, and follow-up questions, challenging the students to justify and defend their answers and those types of things. So the reason that we have a whole section just on this is because questioning is so important to this process. As teachers, we ask questions during 80% of the class time. We ask questions to measure and check for student understanding. We need to make sure that we're asking those open-ended questions that lead to better student understanding. The open-ended questions, along with probing and follow-up questions, will help us promote that critical thinking. Questions that promote multiple students being able to respond. When this type of question is used in the classroom, it demonstrates high expectations for our students. You expect the students to be critical thinkers by asking those open-ended questions rather than what they can memorize in a single direct correct answer. Another common thing we do as teachers that lower the rigor in our classroom with the questioning is when we allow the students to opt out. So a student isn't able to answer a question and we call on a different student, and then we never hold that original student accountable. And then at times what this can do is it can indicate to that student that we do not believe the student has a capability to answer the questions. So it's something to make sure that if a student isn't able to answer a question, go back to them again to show that you do have that faith in them that they can answer questions. They may have not been able to get that first one. We also tend to round up or provide correct answers. If we ask a question and a student is not able to answer, do we ask a follow-up question? Or do we just provide the answer? Or if a student answers a question that is partially correct and then we provide the full correct answer, we're rounding up that answer so the student doesn't really need to answer the question correctly because we round up to the correct answer for them. These last two really come out of the book Teach Like a Champion from Doug Lemov, and he has whole chapters, just whole sections just on these last two things. So that'd be something that if you're interested, you can take a closer look in these two specific strategies, and he has some good strategies for teachers to use in this process. So another thing that we want to take a look at is that active learning. Students doing the cognitive work for at least half the lesson. So think about those lessons and activities and the work that challenges the students to think during the lesson. And really what it comes down to is that active versus passive learning. So let's take a closer look at that. So if we start with the passive learning, so the students just sitting back and listening to a lecture, and then maybe we still expect the students to take notes. But again, we're the one who's doing all the work and they're just passively sitting there and writing down what the teacher tells them to. Because when we only lecture during the lesson, and so let me be clear on this, there are times when we are going to be lecturing during the lesson. But to get to that rigor, we don't want to have the entire lesson just focused on a lecture. Because what happens with that then, you're the one who's doing all the work and you're telling the students everything that's important that they should know, and the students are just sitting back and they're just absorbing that information. Another thing with passive learning is if we're just reading a book or if we're just listening to someone else read, we're passive as we're doing that. We want to have something else that the students are doing as they're doing this process to make sure that they're being active learners while they're going through that process. So maybe you've read a passage, and then at the end of the passage, if a teacher comes in and summarizes what they just learned, again, passive learning. We can flip that over to the active learning if we challenge the students to summarize what they just learned or summarize what they just read. And then, of course, when we just ask those recall level questions, that is another indication of that passive learning. When we're asking, what is this? Where did he go? Those types of things. Those are just those recall level questions. To get more at that active learning, we want to build in some of that collaboration. Build in that collaboration with the students so that they get an opportunity to discuss among their peers some of the different things that they're learning about. Having discussions, more importantly, within those discussions, those open-ended types of discussions where you can have multiple students give a response. So instead of saying who was in the War of 1812, maybe ask a question like who was responsible for starting the War of 1812, or who was most responsible for starting that war. Those different types of questions where there could be several different correct answers. And then when you get at your active reading, so we still have to be reading during the class, but what are they doing while they're reading? Are they highlighting? Are they underlining? Even if we just have questions that they're looking to answer as they're reading, making sure that they're still higher level questions as they're going through that process. Have the students teach the material to each other. Have the students create something. Draw a picture. You read this passage, draw a picture of what that would look like. Those different types of things. We touched on this before with those higher level questions. Problem-based learning, some different ways that really get the students to be active in their learning rather than just sitting back and absorbing information. So another thing that we can do is think about high expectations in the classroom. So it's our actions that demonstrate high expectations. It's more than just a belief saying that I have high expectations of you and you're expected to do all this, but think about those other actions that are connected to that. So if we give student credit for completing work as a class, and then giving the students the grade, are we giving a grade based on student behavior or academic achievement? If we grade on behavior or compliance, are we indicating we do not believe in the abilities of the students and we're doing this so that we can inflate student grades, and it's not really an indicator of what the students are actually learning in class? Think about what is it if the students aren't doing their homework and you just give them an incomplete, or if they don't put any effort on their work and then we just give them a low grade on that. To show high expectations, you go back and you tell the students, you are going to complete this and you are going to turn this in, and really hold them accountable for that. That's how we show that we have those high expectations of those students. Are we working with and supporting students to show that we believe in them and challenge them to complete the work that was assigned? So some other things when you're talking about those ongoing assessments. So as you're going through that lesson, you have that ongoing assessment because you want to know, are the kids getting this? And you're making adjustments if the kids aren't getting it right away. And then you're talking about that student engagement, but beyond the passive engagement, but into that active engagement of what the students are learning. Making those direct connections to the learning targets for the classroom activities to show how everything's connected so that they have to think at that higher level. And then making sure that we're giving relevant feedback to the students to improve. And again, it's not about what you say, but rather it is about what you do during the lesson and during the whole course to show that you have high expectations for students and holding them accountable for the work that you're expecting them to do. So another way that we can show rigor in the classroom is by having a variety of teaching and learning activities built in for our students. Instead of coming in and doing the same exact thing every single day, provide some variety and maybe have 2 or 3 of these different things that you're doing in each lesson. So maybe you're going to lecture for a little while and then you're going to have a classroom discussion, or the students are going to work in groups and they're going to collaborate on a question, or you're bringing in a video, or you're doing a reading. A lot of different things that you can do with the students. And the other reason that we want to bring that variety in and that shows that rigor is also because we want to be able to address the different learning styles that we have with the students that are in our classrooms. So how do we determine if our lesson is actually rigorous? And it's like, think about some of these bullet points here. Does your lesson contain any of or all of the following? There's appropriate but challenging reading materials for the students. Students are held to those high expectations that we talked about previously. We have critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration built into the lesson. We have experiences where students are actively involved in their own learning. Concepts and skills that can be applied to situation, issues, and problems beyond our classroom walls. So it really comes down to how are we challenging the students to think critically in the lessons that we develop? Is it just completing a graphic organizer where they're taking information from the text and just copying it word for word onto a graphic organizer? Or are we challenging the students to take notes while you lecture, asking those open-ended questions? What is a circle? Or who can give me examples of circles in the classroom? So some of those different types of things to make sure that we're challenging the students more. What are the students actually doing? Are they just taking notes? Are they collaborating with their peers? Are they exchanging ideas or the different points of views that they might have? How much thinking is actually required of the students, or is it simply restating what the teacher said or what the student read? So it goes into looking at these different types of things and building these into your lessons and thinking about those experiences that the students are going to be doing and that they're actively involved through this process. So when you're thinking about, is the curriculum rigorous, you really want to get at and look at some of these different things. So what is the reading level of the materials? Granted, you're going to have different ability levels in a lot of our classrooms, but thinking about those reading level of the materials, are they too low? Are they going to be too easy that it's not really challenging the students? Holding those students to those high expectations involves critical thinking, the problem solving. Concepts and skills applied to situation, issues, and problems beyond the classroom walls. Looking at some of these different types of things as we're going through this process. And a few questions to ask yourself as you plan a lesson. Are there activities for inquiry or project-based learning? Are students challenged to form their own answers? Do student learning experiences contain elements from different disciplines, encouraging students to make connections to previous knowledge? Do lesson activities encourage students to make connections to previous knowledge or the real world around them? Or are students challenged to examine their own emotions or take a position on a controversial topic? So as you're going through this process, thinking about some of these, asking yourselves these questions as you're developing your lesson can help you identify and determine if there's enough rigor that's being built in, because the more rigor that we can build into our lessons is going to help us increase our student achievement as we teach our students. So just to recap a little bit, a couple of things to consider. Try to make sure that you're building open-ended questions, and as you're developing your lessons, go ahead and write those questions right on the learning experience so that you have that ready there, and then you have that available for someone new that might be teaching this course. Are you building in those student-centered activities for learning rather than just having lectures the whole time? Do you have time, build in some time for student collaboration? Build in those opportunities for student voice and choice. So making sure that the students have that opportunity to talk and share their thoughts, opinions, and justify their responses and things like that. And then have some of those small things in there where the students have a choice. Choice of some of the things, maybe with the reading material or how they want to present the material, those types of things. And then connect the content and or the skills that we're teaching them to other content areas or their personal lives or the world around them, those types of things. When you can build these types of things in, this can help increase the rigor that we're building in our curriculum.